Welcome to ParentData by Emily Oster. This is Emily. I'm a professor of economics at Brown University and a mom of two. I write a newsletter called ParentData, and on this podcast, I'll read it to you. If you want to read the newsletter yourself and see more of my writing on parenting and pregnancy, you can sign up for free at www.parentdata.org. You'll get reader stories, Q&As, and other special features in your inbox that I don't share here. And now for today's newsletter. So I'm so pleased to have two guests today, Lauren Fleshman and Molly Huddle, and we're going to talk about their books and generally about issues around body changes and adaptation and postpartum and puberty and girls and running. But first, I would love to each have you introduce yourselves briefly. So you tell us who you are, what you do, and what your books are. We'll start with Lauren.
All right, my name is Lauren Fleshman. I'm a former professional runner. And I'm an author of Good for a Girl, A Woman Running in a Man's World. I'm a mom, 2 kids, 9 and 5, and a small business owner. And that's what I do.
I am Molly Huddle, like Emily, a Rhode Island resident. And yes, love our little state. And a professional runner, 5K, 10K marathon, former American record holder, current American record holder in various distances. And I have one new daughter. She's 7 months old. And I co-wrote a book with my friend Sarah Slattery called How She Did It.
Amazing. Okay, so to set the stage, I want to start with why I am excited about this conversation so you guys know where we're going. So Lauren, your book is about a lot of things, but a core theme is this adaptation from being like a girl runner to a woman runner. Mm-hmm. And Molly, some of the essays in your book touch on similar themes, but also over the past 8 months or so, you've been documenting your return to running after her birth. And in both of these cases, I think there feels like a desire to get back to where you were before. And that desire more nebulously affects a lot of women in both of these stages. So when I wrote about postpartum stuff in Crib Sheet, there were very clear parallels for me to puberty. Like, what happened to my body? Why are there all these weird lumps? Will they ever go away and go back to where they were before? But I think for most people in most of those phases, this discomfort is hard to put your finger on. So when we say, like, I want to be back to my normal self at work, or I want my pants to fit in the old way, it's hard to always know what it would mean to be back. And what struck me about the running in these settings is that it's so measurable. So I'm never going to know whether I'm back to being as good an economist as I was before I had kids, but you're definitely going to know if you are back to running as fast as you did before, or at least you'll know that in a much more concrete way. So it just seemed to me like a very stark example. I think the reality is, and this comes out a lot of in Lauren's book in particular, like getting back to where things were before in exactly the same way, it can't always be the goal because it's not necessarily possible. And the challenge is more about moving through it to someplace better. I think that's true both in the puberty case and the postpartum case. And it's true not just for running, but for all of the things that we're doing. So ideally, that's the theme I'd like to draw out a little bit. And so I want to start there by talking about the puberty transition for girls, especially the sort of girl athletes, which as a parent of an 11-year-old, I was reading and taking notes and putting stickies on and so on. So Lauren, I would love you to just talk a little bit about this in general through your own experience, kind of what are the key things that you hit on in the book?
I think that, the stage your daughter's in right now, kids before puberty are sort of these gender neutral creatures, and there's no sex-based differences of significance before puberty between boys and girls. And so what you're facing is like the puberty initiates this divergence of these two paths based on sex that may or may not align with like how you feel on the inside or what you're ready for or your gender identity or various other things. And at least for me, that's where this stage of like unfairness came in the book. I remember feeling this deep sense of like, this isn't fair. Why does, Adam down the street, his body's changing in this way and mine's changing in this other way. And so there is this problem. It's really only a problem because the structures that we move girls and boys through in sports don't create like a welcoming, accommodating, encouraging space for those divergence of changes. I mean, there'd be like comparison between you and your male friends regardless, probably. But like we have current sports systems that ignore, erase, invalidate don't talk about like these very basic embodied experiences that females are going through. And so that's where the tension is created. And it's honestly not too much different in pregnancy too, in that way, that it's the incompatibility of the spaces. It's the like changing tables only in the women's restrooms. It's the, it's the places you go that make it harder than it needs to be. Right.
Agreed. Yes, changing tables in the restroom is a perennial problem on both sides, actually. I mean, in some ways it illustrates the unfairness of in both directions. Like, why can't my spouse find a changing table? And also, why do I always have to find a changing table? But in this sort of puberty space, Molly, your book is a series of basically like interviews, essays, stories with the different runners. I think this theme comes up a lot. What is the core of this issue in this transition for a lot of girls and women?
Yeah, I think the theme of Lauren's book and the kind of reason we wrote our book, it's a similar concept of like young phenom girls before puberty, and distance running anyway, tend to disappear after puberty. And it's like, what is the cause of that? And there's so many reasons why we want to avoid that. One, our book is a high performance guide, so we want the talent to rise to the top, but also just having sport in your life, your whole life, and not being deterred by puberty or by the other variables that steer girls off course when they drop out of sport at higher rates at like the age of puberty, 12, 13, 14. We want sports to be benefiting many talent levels of girls as they go into womanhood. So there's so many great lessons and empowering things about sports. And that was kind of like our twofold reason for writing the book. But yeah, a lot of the women talked about, it wasn't super direct, but you could kind of infer from their stories that like they would pick up injuries because the training wasn't suited for them, or they would suffer from like low energy availability because they were trying to change their body to like not go through puberty, or once they went through puberty to still look like the boys or look like their young, athletic selves. I know Lauren's really familiar with just, you get to a high level of sport and you see that over and over again. So those are kind of two reasons that body transformation just kind of gets girls off course in the sport, and a lot of them quit, or they just stop being rewarded by good performances and move on to a different thing. So yeah, that was one of the valleys that a lot of the women pushed through and got out the other side and had success. And that's why we talked to them. Right. But definitely a common theme.
Yeah, and I think, of course, in your book, like we're selecting the people who got out on the other side of this.
Yeah, I think more broadly too, just like in my book, I talk about breast development in middle school, and that is the first stage of female puberty, and that's where we have a huge amount of drop off. It's like in Canada, 1 in 3 girls leave sport around this time, and versus 1 in 10 boys, and that's just like a massive difference, and it's entirely preventable. And it really comes down to like, are we acknowledging the way it feels different in your body after you develop breasts to move? Like, that's a uniquely female problem, to be climbing trees and running down the street and jumping rope. And then all of a sudden, all those activities feel dramatically different as soon as you have breasts, or as soon as, you develop these body composition changes that don't immediately have a performance advantage. Like long-term they do. Like when you ride out the changes, like you will improve, you will be your best self in your woman body. But we just have a longer timeline than the male body to be able to see those changes through on average. And it's not talked about or accommodated because the changes in the female body are sexualized. So as when breasts are coming into being in middle school, I mean, they've interviewed PE teachers, they've interviewed teachers. I mean, people are uncomfortable talking about it. They don't know how to broach the subject. So it's limited to health class, but health class is not going to provide any insight on your embodied experience of moving through the world with breasts or a menstrual cycle. It's really just like a diagram and a chart and some vocabulary words, right? So like we just have this huge gap in normalizing this different timeline, these temporary things that make sport a little bit harder at first, but then once you make the adjustment to your new body, you will thrive. And it frustrates me because it is very simple. There's like a nonprofit, Bras for Girls, that goes into middle schools, provides free sports bra and breast education. And like, it's like the most powerful intervention. And I can't help but wonder if males got breasts in middle school if that wouldn't be like standard issue PE equipment. But
definitely. I mean, isn't a jock? Don't they give them jocks? Isn't there some standard issue PE equipment to deal with the
you know
the
what?
bouncing?
I don't know, but I wonder. Like, I do wonder. Like,
I am not an expert.
I do know that like this is like loosely related, but vasectomies are covered as an excused reason for my female teacher to leave work to care for a loved one after surgery, but birth is not.
Mm-hmm.
So her sister's birth, she couldn't take time off work to help with her traumatic after her birth, but she can help with somebody's vasectomy.
Which actually is largely just an ice pack
exactly
for a day or two.
This is this problem, like, it extends.
It extends. Like how much of these issues in sport are because we are coaching girls and boys, whether it's running or something else, whether we're coaching them the same. And we kind of have a boys sports system when we build a girls sports system as kind of a byproduct of that. And then of course we expect everything to go the same because that's how we built it.
Yeah. I mean, I think Lauren, you touched on that in your book. Sport was built by men first, and then women weren't allowed to do, we have a timeline in our book that shows how late women entered track and field and sports like athletics. And it was already built. It was built by men for the men and boys. And so, of course, we were funneled in. All the coaches are men. Still, most of the coaches are men. Still, most of the administrators are men. Most of the athletic directors are men. So it's like, I see how like it's not woman shaped in any way. We're kind of trying to like push those shapes out as we go through it, I think only just now. And so I think that is where a lot of the misunderstandings and like not noticing that our bodies are a little bit different. I mean, it's not like we're a different species, but like you could serve women better in sport than what we're doing now. And so it isn't as complicated. Yeah, like Lauren said, some of it's like fairly simple, like accommodating things and explaining things and adjusting timelines and things like that.
Part of the problem is that there is a small percentage of female athletes that are emulating the male athlete experience, and very few of them are doing it without harming themselves in some short-term or long-term way. There are some that are just like genetically built in a way that has them progress more on a male timeline, but it's very rare. And then you have people coming in every year who, restrict their diet, fight puberty, get an eating disorder, do any of these various things that in the short term help them emulate a male performance trajectory. And they serve as the evidence that the system works just fine. Because by the time their problems happen, they're on their way out and the next ones are on their way in. And so we're just kind of stuck in this cycle. And I was that person. So
yeah, I was just going to say, I kind of was that person. I feel like the more you were like a dude, the more coachable you were, the more coaches liked working with you. Like it was very much like that. I feel like when we were coming through college.
Very much. And then when you justify the standard's existence, then it makes it harder for change to happen. I mean, it's the same thing in like, I don't know. You just the question we need to be asking is why aren't there as many female athletes thriving as male athletes? Like if we get a female president, it doesn't mean that sexism is gone. We still need to ask, why has there been one, and like these are the things we have to ask. But there's always going to be people like us who are like strivers and who are privileged and have had some luck and some hard work that are like, see, it can be done. I'm the minority in my field. It can be done. And then but then what? Like, that doesn't actually change a system, right?
Yeah, it's so interesting because I think so I also work in a very male dominated field, and in economics, we talk a lot about sort of generating gender parity. And I think for many generations, the expectation was that you're going to fit the male mold. So the way to achieve this is just to be like the guys and to think that, masturbation jokes are funny or penguin bloopers are great or whatever is like the, particular set of things that I think is only actually the generation of women almost like sort of one cohort younger than me who I now see much more being like, hey, maybe like those jokes were not that funny. And we should try to sort of do more about the culture rather than, just kind of try to get to the top and then sort of help on the edges. And that's been quite interesting as a phenomenon. I think it makes me feel a little ashamed, actually. But,
Well, but I think that's just a natural order of things. The first people who come in have to do what they need to do to survive. And then you get to critical mass of numbers. And then at that point, you kind of like, we need to let the 20 somethings and early 30 somethings wake us up and be like, oh yeah, we don't have to stand for that. We don't have to deal with that. And then like, we actually do deserve to shape the systems that we work in. And even though it will be painful and awkward for some of the people around us, it's hard work though.
So actually, this is a good transition to this postpartum thing, because that is something in your field where I think there has been some substantial push in the last few years, is sort of thinking about the way that we deal with return to running after pregnancy. So Molly, I wondered if you could talk a little bit about whatever you're willing to share, a little bit about your own experience, but also about how this has changed in the past few years. Because I think it's a good example of a place where advocacy changed some of the gender dynamics. Not enough probably, but at least some.
Yes. So I had my daughter about 7 and a few extra weeks, about 7 months ago. And the landscape when I was pregnant with her in professional track and field anyway, as far as how contracts are protected, it just was so different. And most of that was blown open by Alicia Montano and the Dream Maternity Campaign and Allison Felix. And that changed a lot in such a short amount of time. It was incredible. Like usually you see things chip away at these standards. And that was like, my contract was up around then, and I got a maternity clause in there right away just because of that. And I think a little bit too, like I was working with a female president at Saucony. She was new, but I had tried to actually incorporate that into 2 previous contracts, and it was denied. And I don't know how, who, where, at what level it was denied, but it was something that I was like, okay, we're going to get it in there now. And like, it was fine. Like it was, maybe it wasn't up to, at least Alicia might have said, make sure you get this, and this specifically. But like, at least I was able to be pregnant and not rush my way back and still keep my income for the thing that I like support our family doing. So that was hugely different. And I remember when we were making it, I sent the head of marketing at Saucony, like a study from Trent Stellingworth on like what the recommended return to run is after pregnancy and like how long it really is. Like, cause they were like, we'll give you what our standard office workers receive for maternity leave. And I was like, well, like 3 months to be like back at like a diamond league isn't really reasonable. But I think they were just like, yeah, no, we'll give you like the time you need. But that definitely is something I'm, coming back, using that information. It's a much slower process than what a lot of women had done previously. Like I think you'll talk to someone like Kara Goucher, and she was back running the Boston Marathon at a really high level 6 months after having a baby, whereas I was, nowhere near ready for running a marathon, 26 miles 6 months later. And so I used a pelvic floor specialist to kind of pace me, and a physical therapist to kind of pace my comeback. And it's slow. Like it takes as long as it takes to gestate, birth, recover, come back. Like it just takes a certain amount of time. And so
is it incredibly frustrating, Molly?
How slow it takes? Yes, I am. I could have hastened things by like training harder while I was pregnant, but I was 38 years old. Like I wanted a break. I didn't want to do that. But I think that it still would have been slow. Like it would have maybe accelerated it by a month or 2. So yeah, your body it can be frustrating because you take for granted how much it did for you when you were running, and now it's doing this other priority. Like it reminds me all the time that this is not my priority right now physically. Like it's like, no, your priority is, birthing the baby. Your priority is feeding the baby now. Your priority is so it's like, even though I'm trying with my brain to like get back on the track, my body's like, your baby's not one yet. Like I still have caring to do. I still have moving and shifting and hormonal stuff to do. So
as you will learn, Molly, even when they're 7 and they still need, apparently you're not done.
I'm not done when they're 1? Oh my God.
You're not done. Yeah. It's just like then it's boarding school. You just send them out and it's over.
It is kind of encouraging though, that like in an extreme, like sports is really an extreme example for there to even be any kind of pregnancy protection, because our job is our physical body's ability to perform. And so if we can get pregnancy protections in place for that kind of a job that can have flexibility to take you through more time than you'd want it to take, we we should be able to do it in other jobs where your job isn't like purely physical, right? Like that we should be able to push for it in those spaces too. And I think a lot of times like sport is an arena where you can have social change first, or like it can be a leader in political movements, social movements. And then that helps get like, it's like a jumping pad for other industries to go, hey, it's being done over here. Let's do it over here. So I hope that it can help other industries.
I also think there's something very interesting and parallel about this idea of kind of the slow return, because I feel like for many of us sort of coming back from having a baby, you know, there's a period in which I didn't want to do anything except have, you know, be with the baby, and physically I couldn't leave the house and so on. But then there was a much longer period, one I'm still feel I'm somewhat in, but at any rate, it was certainly longer than the first few months, in which I wanted to be working at a lower level. So, you know, I wanted to be doing the economics equivalent of, you know, training, but not at the intensity that I was before, because there was this other thing going on, whether it was physical or exhaustion or, you know, just taking up mental space. And when we think about maternity leave in almost any other sector, of course, you know, for many of us, we're lucky that you have any. But when people have maternity leave, it's much more in the space of, you know, well, you have 6 weeks, or you have 3 months, or you have 4 months. And then at the end of 4 months, well, then you're just done. You cooked it all, it's all ready. And then you can just come back and be at 170% like you were before. And that's just not possible. And I think it's part of what frustrates a lot of people. And I think it's honestly part of what ultimately causes a lot of people to leave the labor force. As you say, like, I just, like, I'd love to be back at 65% or 50% for a while, but I can't be back at 150% again, because that's not feasible for me.
Yeah. And you got to wonder, like, I bet a lot of careers could theoretically allow a dial button if you are like willing to work 60% and get paid 60%, or whatever it is. And you could self-select your hours based on, and for men too, like, like went after the female specific portions of gestation and birth and like initial nursing and things like that. Should be a discussion in families of who's going to be able to dial things down, because the absurdity of the 40-hour work week, which a lot of people even work way more than that was essentially designed around one working family households. And then when you have two working parents, you cannot get everything done without somebody burning out and losing their mind, or relationships being under incredible amounts of strain. So in general, it's like there's this theme in my book about how, we can talk about how women and girls, we need something different. We should have sporting structure built around our specific needs, but like boys and men would benefit from a lot of those new changes too. Like the model is not ideal for the modern male either, in any of these places, in corporate America, in anywhere. Like, more men than ever want to be active parents, and they want these options too. And so I sort of think of it as like, if we've centered men in the creation of our structures for a really long time. If we center women and girls in them, we'll probably all benefit, because it's not just about centering women and girls. It's about doing it in the 21st century or whatever. It's like a chance to do it again. And I know that's very pie in the sky. Like, I tend to kind of think like that, but I'm also kind of like, well, we made it once. Like, we can make it again.
Could make it different and better.
Why not?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, no, I think it's true. I mean, it's true. I think that men would benefit from an approach to leave and child rearing that was more equal, or certainly allowed more of a kind of equal set of choices around this. Yeah. So Molly, do you think you can come back like better? Can we all, I think this idea of, well, I'm going to get back to where I was. I think we can come back better, maybe not as, maybe running is harder than some other things, but I don't know. I think sometimes there's like lessons from parenting that make it possible to do your job better than you did before.
I love, there's a quote from Chelsea Sodaro, who just won the Ironman Kona. And she,
with an 18-month-old.
Yeah, her daughter's not even 2. And she said it's a reinvention. It's not a comeback. And she reinvented herself into a Kona champion. So you could argue that's better than where she was. But like, it's different. She's different. I'm sure it's not the same amount of time given to what she's doing or the same way. I'm sure there's something different about it, but that doesn't mean the outcomes aren't still like big dreams, big goals. You've seen it with many other female athletes to prove that, like, you know, you're right. There's performance metrics. Are you better? Are you not? The answer is you can be, because we see Faith Kipyegon, we've seen Sally Kipyego, we've seen Alfine Tomac, we've seen Chelsea. Like, we've seen it over and over. It just takes a couple years, almost 2 years on average. But I'm sure there's differences behind the scenes to where, you know, it's not the same route you took before, where you're just out there dedicating every little inch to the sport and never taking your eyes off it.
Yeah, there was an interview at some point with Jakob Ingebrigtsen, who is, for people who are not as nerdy as the three of us, is a very good Swedish, right? Is he Swedish or Norwegian? I'm going to mess this up.
Norwegian.
No, okay. At any rate, he's from a Scandinavian country. But he said when he trained, all he does is run and play video games and eat and sleep. And that's it. He doesn't do anything else. He doesn't even read books because it takes too much mental energy to, like, it takes it away from his focus on running. And I was sort of always thinking about that, right? Like, have these women who are running with small children. It's like the idea that your life would just be running and video games and eating and sleeping. That's like completely turned off. But it, I guess, sort of shows that there's many ways to do this, and that perhaps he's not ready for a child yet.
Well, another kind of interesting thing along those lines, when I was competing, and we do our racing season in track mostly in Europe over the summer, and I remember talking to a woman from Kenya that had 2 babies, and she was saying that they were very young. The second one was like very young, and she was just like, I just, you know, I leave for the whole summer. I leave for the whole summer and race. And I'm like thinking, like, who's watching your kid? And that she's got a whole community of people, aunties and her sister and like all these people. And like, we don't have a structure like that either. Like, we still have a structure where we expect the birthing parent to be the one that is doing all of the things. And some of us want to do that. I didn't, but, you know, some of us really genuinely feel that pull and want to do that. But there's certainly, like, I would have loved the option that she was talking about, to be like, oh, okay, that's culturally acceptable. And like, that's, people are excited to support me in that. And I'll miss my kid obviously a lot, but I can do my job without also needing to bring like a nanny and like all the other things that just make it impossible. And that's why people end up leaving the sport.
So I want to kind of close with 2 things. But first is Lauren, I want to ask about solutions, you know, particularly on the kind of parenting side, because some of what you talk about as a parent is a little freaky and, you know, makes one a little nervous about, you know, what are the experiences that my kids are going to have, as they're, particularly my daughter's going to have, sort of as they move through this phase of sport. So other than sports bras in schools, which I'm fully supportive of, what else do you think needs to happen?
I think that we can't guarantee coach education on female physiology, normal female performance waves versus like linear lines, all these things. We can't force that yet. That is a solution, though, down the road, is just requiring mandatory education on the female body and its development and puberty for anyone that works with female athletes of a particular age range. So as parents, we can be informed on it. Read my book. That's one starting point. But then, like, just you, I think, as for you, be prepared for her body to change, be prepared to be the person that isn't greeting that change with like gloom and doom, because she's going to get a lot of that if she's having success in sport and then it starts to kind of plateau as things are shifting. There's just these horrible myths about puberty, that it's a career ender, that, you know, it's the one injury a girl can't come back from. I mean, there's just like horribly toxic ways of talking about this that will be going on around her. And if you know better and you're like, hey, you're prime, like all the world records, all the best performers did it as women in women bodies. Your best years are going to happen when they're going to happen. There is just a temporary period of time when you're getting used to this new body. You're building up your strength, your ligaments, your tendons, like all the things have to adjust to this new body, but they will, because the body's an amazing, miraculous thing. And right now there's other ways to improve that aren't going to show up on a clock. You can improve tactics. You can improve like community building on your team, leadership skills. You can certainly work on nutrition. You shouldn't work on nutrition to achieve a particular body ideal during those ages, but just learning about what foods fuel you best, those kinds of things are going to serve you throughout your life. So I think just like having a broad definition of success that includes more things than these measurables is really important. And then just keeping that confident look on the long term.
I love it. All right. So Molly, here's my ending. So I think a lot of times for women and girls, we tend to be quite reluctant to embrace the attempt to be great. That there's almost a shame in saying, I want to be the best, and that it's better to be well-rounded and be good at some things and good at everything. And, you two are obviously both really, really, really great at many things, but running being the measurable one that people know you for. And you said something to Emily Sisson about this, which really resonated with me. And for the background, Emily is Molly's training partner, and she just set the American record in the marathon. Can you close out by telling us the context there and what you told her?
Yes. So we, Emily and I had this conversation a couple times, or this topic of conversation a couple times, and it probably won't be super relatable to the listener because the origin of it was about how in the sports marketing side of things, like there's our performance and then there's all the little things we're meant to do to increase our social media presence, be more marketable, put up good content, do this extra community, do these extra things, build our story, build our brand. And it can just be a distraction nearly from trying to be really good at running, kind of like Jacob Ingebrigtsen with his just video games and running. It's like, it helps if you're doing less and just kind of putting all the energy into running to get the platform first, and then you can do the things. And she sometimes felt a little bit scattered about it. And I was kind of like, it's okay to just go all in on something. Just go for it. Just try to be the best at it. Don't worry too much about, being also this other story that your, New Balance wants you to be this person and this girl next door and that, and give off this image. Go destroy your track workout, rest on the couch and do it over and over again. And then you're going to be able to check off those huge, scary goals that you have. That's enough. To be the best marathoner in American history is enough. I feel like a lot of people kind of are well, does she also do this? Does she also do that? And I wonder if that's a very female athlete, problem to have. Well, does she give back to charity? Well, does she also have a camp? Does she also have and it's she's the best. Do you ask that of the guys? No.
Yeah, I think it is a very gendered thing, that the idea of just the thing I'm going to focus on now is I'm going to try to be the best. And sometimes you want to try to be the best.
And that's not a win at all cost thing. It's just why isn't it enough for some people? It's not judged as enough. And I'm you know what, Emily, it's enough. You're fine. You're doing good.
It's enough. She's doing good. All right. Thank you both so much. This was awesome. Lauren's new book is called Good for a Girl, and Molly's book is How She Did It. And I am so happy to have had you both. Thank you.
Thanks for the time.
Yeah. Thanks, Emily.
Thanks for listening. If you like what you heard, subscribe to ParentData in your favorite podcast app and rate and review the show in Apple Podcasts. You can subscribe to the whole newsletter for free at www.parentdata.org. Talk to you soon.